Designing conditional access policies without ever seeing how another organization does conditional access is really difficult. So today I'm going to show you the second in a set of videos called Practical Conditional Access Policies. And I am going to walk through a set of policies that I commonly see out in the wild that you can then take, modify, and build your own policy sets. So today's video is going to be all about what I call the castle bypass, which is essentially the idea of I want MFA everywhere out in the world except for from my trusted locations. This is a really common set of policies out there, one I've used personally in my organization. It's not one that I think I would probably do today, but if you have business requirements that require that set of controls, well, this is the video to walk you through how to deploy that and how to augment that idea with some other security features that will help secure your organization from malicious actors taking advantage of that very common policy design. So that being said, let's get into it and let's talk about conditional access and the castle bypass. So every good policy design starts with a plan, and that's exactly where we're going to start today. We're going to use this Excel spreadsheet to design our policies. So let's start with our policy goals. So here is our goals for this deployment. Require MFA for all access except from trusted locations, so your home office. And again, this might not be the best long-term plan for you, but it certainly is a common one. And so in another video, I'll talk about the best type of MFA, at least in my opinion. But today, MFA for all access except trusted locations. We're going to block legacy auth. And you know what? Admins, we're going to require admins to MFA in all situations. So we're going to design that as part of it. Then we're going to augment this policy with a gap filler that basically says, if you're not on that trusted location, you can't register for a new MFA, right? And this is to prevent a hacker from targeting a user that only works for the office and potentially could have never registered for MFA. And so if they target that user that has never registered for MFA, they could potentially use their password and just register their own cell phone as the MFA provider. And so we want to block that type of policy if we're adding these gaps in our CA. So let's walk through these policies. We're going to need 5 set of CA policies to make that happen, right? And in this case, the first policy that we're going to do is require MFA and for admins. And so we're just going to target the admin roles in this policy and require MFA. One of the things that you may want to consider long-term is switching to an authentication strength, such as a FIDO2 security keys. Very popular, highly would recommend admins using FIDO2 security keys. Second policy, this is going to be our standard user policy. So this is the one where we're going to design in the bypass, and essentially we're going to use trusted locations for this. Legacy protocols, of course, we're going to target that and block that. So those are the most hacked items. You should be moving away from that entirely. You want to test it before you block it out entirely. And then the last two, require MFA from a non-trust, or require MFA registration from a non-trusted locations. I'll show you 2 varieties of how to achieve this goal and some good options there. And then finally, MFA for guests. Your guests should MFA, right? If your end user MFAing all B2B guests in your organization, anybody's accessing your team or SharePoint site should MFA. So that's the plan. Now let's get into the design. All right, so let's build our conditional access policies. And the place we got to start is, of course, Azure Active Directory. Terms and conditions do apply to this video. You want all of these settings in your environment to make this whole thing work. But the simple ones are, modern authentication needs to be enabled. Modern experience should be turned on if you haven't done that as well, or the combined registration experience. Microsoft's doing this by default for a lot of things, so these should be set in your environment. And then the last more detailed one is in the legacy portal. You want these settings here, which I'll screenshot and put on as well. All those being said, let's get in and we'll start designing our policy. So let's go to named locations, and this is where we're going to plug in our IP address range as our trusted set of IP addresses. So we're going to call this Corp Office. Go ahead and mark this as trusted, just with helps with kind of the review. We can use this in our CA policy if you want to target it, or we can target specific ones. and program in your IP address range. So this needs to be the public exposed IP address range. Don't put your internal, IP address range that, Microsoft doesn't see that. This needs to be what is visible to Azure AD as your end users are signing in. So in my case, I'll put in some vague values here. 72. And away we go. So fill out your IP address ranges there, and you should be good to go. Next, let's go back to policies, and let's start putting our policies in place. So first one I'm going to start with is this MFA for admin accounts. And real simply, we're just going to build this out. So target all of these user groups that you are, directory roles. That should be, all of the admins that you use in your environment. Go through, turn it on, in this case, I'm going to target the ones I'm only using in this environment, for testing and things like that, but you should target all of your accounts. If you have a break glass and you need to exclude your break glass, please do so at this time. And you can program that in to say, hey, that's good to go. Microsoft does recommend having a break glass account, and there is the link in the directions for that break glass. All right, in this case, we're going to make it simple, and we're going to target all cloud apps. For our admin policy, no configuration or no conditions in scope here. This way, it's very, very broad in basically, it's going to MFA in all situations, right? Make it simple. And the control that we're going to do in this case is require multi-factor authentication, right? And that's the easiest one, and that's the most common one I want to see. But however, I would love it if you as an organization switched over to using phish-resistant MFA and provided FIDO2 security keys to all of your IT admins. That would be absolutely the best form of protection for your admin accounts, and I would highly recommend it. They're only like $30 for a FIDO2 security key, so buying it for all of your global admins, not too terribly cost prohibitive. So highly would recommend that. But for today, we're just going to require a standard MFA, and we're set. First policy done. So that is all good there. We didn't use that named location yet, but we will now. So let's go build our second policy. So standard end users, and let's create that one. And in this case, we're going to select, I'm going to target all users, and we're going to exclude directory roles. So again, the same ones we did before. So global administrator, and obviously make this right size to you as an organization, the roles that you're doing. And then we're going to exclude all of our B2B guests because we'll do a separate policy for this. So again, the idea with this is it's very broad, right? We're targeting everything, not a lot of gaps that we're putting into this policy. We're going to target and exclude guests and admin roles, which we have another policy that specifically targets those things. Same idea in this case. We're going to target all cloud apps for this. That way we can get very good coverage of this. If you do switch over to a targeted app, say like, I know it's very common to only target Office 365, you need to put in other controls in place if you're only targeting that. So like you want to basically make sure, Intune enrollment is also MFA'd if you ever targeted that Office 365 or some of the other apps. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to target all cloud apps. And this is the conditions aspect that we're going to do. So in this case, we're going to include any location and exclude the named location that we did, right? So this is that corporate office. You can see here in this policy list, we do have these trusted locations as excluded. So if you wanted to get granular, like the East Coast office and the West Coast office and the Seattle office, you could build them as separate targets, or maybe like the colo or something like that. If you mark it as trusted, you can just toggle that and use that all trusted locations. However, if you want to get granular, you have to build those different IP address ranges out separately. Okay, so a lot of different ways to do that. And then next, we're going to come into this and require multi-factor authentication. And that's how the policy is designed. So let's just make sure we cover that. All users except guests and admins, all cloud apps, And this is going to apply to any location except for our corporate office. And the control that we're going to do in this case is require multi-factor authentication. And so at that point, we're good to go. And you can set that up and test it. Of course, if you do not want to target all users with this policy at the start, right, use a testing group, come in and, target that MFA enabled users group or whatever group that you're doing it for. And then eventually you do want to switch it to all users so you get full coverage in your environment. Okay. All right, that's policy 2. So let's switch over and we'll do since we added the guest accounts, we'll do that one next as an exclusion policy here and make sure we're covering them. Same idea again, MFA for guest users. We're going to select directory role or guests and external users, not that one. And we're going to target all of these different type of guests in our environment. All cloud apps, all conditions by selecting none of them, and then require multi-factor authentication. So similar to the admin policies, your guests aren't going to be on your network. There should be no reason to target them with these CA policies, right? And don't need to put in the gaps in it. So we're just not going to have that as an option. If they're a guest accessing our environment, they have to be MFA'd. And go ahead and create that. You'll notice here I am using a standard naming scheme for this just to make it easier for me to see high level what each of our policy does, right? So in this case, MFA, 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 and then the description of this. Change this to meet your needs, but this helps me with a lot of this design intent. Fourth policy that we're going to make, and this is a block one, right? So we're going to block legacy authentication in our environment. And all users in this context, all cloud apps, and this is where we're going to target the client apps. And specifically for legacy, we want to target these legacy policies and block them. Again, this is the most commonly hacked protocols that is in use. Microsoft's already disabled a ton of them, but there are still some of them that they are not quite ready to disable. And so it's important that you block this and block a hacker from using. You probably don't use this in your environment, or you shouldn't be using this in your environment anyways. So let's just block that as a protocol that an attacker can exploit. So in this case, we're going to use the control block access. So again, right, lines up to the naming convention. What's the control that we're putting in place? In this case, it's block. And Microsoft wants me to understand, yes, I will let this affect my account, and that's okay. If you wanted to put, again, a bypass for your break glass or a bypass for that one app that you still are hanging on to, you can do that. And again, with this policy, you should test it first before deploying it out, or at least look at your sign-in logs to make sure everything is not using that and it's only hackers using it. All right. Anyways, we're creating these in report only at this point. Now, the final policy that we're going to do in this case is either a block or require MFA for registration when not in the trusted location. So this is something that I would really highly recommend if you were going down this route of looking at trusted locations. You really want to augment that set of policies with a requirement of where that registration can happen. I've seen this very common as a set of policies, and then I've seen hackers really take advantage of an organization that's using it because it has an inherent built-in gap, right? So the gap in this case is you might have an end user that only works for the office. So you might have an end user that pretty much always that office worker, never leaves, never sets up their mobile device. They have a good life balance separation from corporate, and they may, with the other policies that we did, they may never actually be required to ever register. And so what I've seen hackers do is take advantage of that. Target Judy in HR, who is a part-time employee, and she never has to work remote or anything like that. So the policy never requires her to register for MFA. Well, so the hacker comes in, they get their password off of, a breach site or something along that lines, and they just use their password to sign in for the first time. And the experience that is in the design is that hacker will just be required to register for MFA. Hacker goes in, puts it in their cell phone, uses the app, and they're good to go. They can use that and continue using that account with just their password, and they've just registered for MFA, and they are set. They can keep accessing the environment. So we want to block that, right? So in this case, how we're going to do that is we're going to target all users or actually you might scope this to just where you have your gaps, but register security information. So we're going to put a control in place to say, hey, where can you register that security information? And it's going to be the same set or reverse set of policies. So in this case, we're going to include any location and we're going to exclude, I did that backwards in my head. We're going to exclude the trusted location from this policy. And two options for this. So we can block registration when not on trusted location, or here's an interesting kind of differentiator here. You can require multi-factor authentication to register for multi-factor authentication. It sounds kind of funny, but it does work. The reason why I like this as a policy versus the block is this gives you some options for getting a remote user enrolled. So if you do it this way, if you do a block, well, that's great. They have to be on campus to register for MFA. If you do it this way, they still have to be on campus to register for MFA, or they have to MFA in. If an end user isn't registered for MFA, they get automatically blocked. However, if you do this option, you can generate a temporary access pass to bypass this control and get them into your CA policies so that they can register. So this can be a really nice augment to that policy type, that gap that we created by not requiring MFA except for in the trusted location. This will fill that gap for you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set this as such. And again, I understand that my policy will be infected by this. Again, you might actually want to come into this and say, you probably should also exclude your guests from this policy, now that I'm thinking about it. And you should also exclude the global admins as well from this policy. We have another policy that says that's specifically targeting them, and they will be required to MFA to get into the environment. So, that should be good. And we are set here. All right, so that's the policy design. That is kind of this kind of good options. And let's go ahead and demo what this experience is like for a couple of these policies. So give me 1 second, I'll go ahead and convert this and set this up. All right, so here's the different end user experiences that you're gonna see when these policies are deployed. We have the admin on the left and a standard end user on the right. When we go ahead and sign in as the admin will be required to MFA. In this case, I'm gonna use my push notification and approve it. And on the right, we can see Diego is logging in, and he is just allowed to access our environment without any, additional, sign in, no MFA prompt, right? He's coming from the trusted location. He's allowed to bypass. So that's great. That's kind of the experience we're wanting to see. However, I want to also show you that MFA registration experience when you're not on campus. Because we put in the control to block that MFA, you really want to get Diego to either pre-register or we want to block that registration off campus. However, what we'll see in this scenario is we want a way that maybe if Diego starts working off campus, without letting us know or without that pre-register, we don't want him or a hacker to sign in to MFA without getting that. So this is a cool option for this, right? Again, Diego's not registered for MFA at this point and doesn't have to get in. So we want to fill that gap. So I'm going to go and change some settings so that Diego is required so we can demo what it looks like if Diego is off campus and tries to sign in. All right, Diego is now off campus, still hasn't registered for MFA, and let's go ahead and sign in now. And again, typically you'll get the sign in and in this case, more information required for him. And if we try to proceed to go do that MFA registration, now Diego is going to get blocked, right? Just like that, just like as we are policy designed. Now, in our case, what we did in this one is MFA registration was the requirement in this grant. Again, if you switch to block or require MFA, that will be his sign-in option, right? He'll get the same experience either way. However, the nice thing about doing this is that we can actually now come to Diego's account and use a temporary access pass to bypass this. So Diego never registered for MFA, didn't follow the directions as an organization. That's okay. It's still not a big issue for us. He calls in, calls help desk, and help desk can issue him a temporary access pass to sign into our environment. And the great thing about a tap is it bypasses the MFA control. So let's go ahead and close that. So here we are. Let's sign in as Diego now with that tap generated. And Diego can go ahead and use this to access our environment. And away he goes. This bypasses the MFA requirement. And if Diego wanted, now he could come in and actually complete his security registration and get himself onboarded for MFA within the next hour, at least as long as this tap is available. And away he goes, right? He's able to do his job, able to get in with that option. And so that is a nice augmenter for your policies. So there you go. That's the Castle Bypass CA policy design. I hope this helps you out there as you are thinking about your policies and how you are considering deploying CA. I hope this also adds another tool in your toolbox and consideration when you add in this bypass of IP address and named location or trusted locations from your deployment. If you have questions, please reach out. I would love to answer and get you supported as I can if I'm available. And I hope this really helps you, secure your environment. Good luck out there and stay safe.